sense of Irmgard in her sort of shy, a little bit retreating and not imposing herself could change within a nanosecond, in which she would be in there like yanking somebody or something with her full strength and moving them into the action itself. Yeah, good point. Yep.
So I always remember this photo that you have of Irmgard like carving around the rose, and so I was doing this like trying to get full body carving because I was thinking about her and really carving with whatever it was, with the space, with the person, but in a co-creative dynamic. Maybe it was direct or indirect, but it was really working with what was there.
Saying how able Irmgard was to just be in the moment and about process. And this sort of endless curiosity about the body that could always be new. Not being attached to one goal.
Not being attached to one goal,
but
right.
Open.
Yes, Rosa Bartenieff was very into that idea that she had of just responding to the moment in process.
Interconnectivity to outer expressivity, and then outer expressivity to inner connectivity.
Yes.
I have one.
Okay.
I can remember Irmgard being quite fierce. She would get irritated with people who were stuck in their heads, and she could be with them for a little while, and then she'd say, "Okay, if that's what you think."
I remember that she worked with polio victims.
She did,
That
absolutely.
made me think of, a kind of incapable action, a kind of demuscularized thing, and how her work with psoas and hamstring would help a person of that disability towards better functionality.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true. Yeah.
Very, very, that's it.
Finding an efficient way to bring in a new possibility. With her polio patients, you just come and sit here. So they'd be sitting in their chair kind of like, oh, I'm not going to do this. Whatever it is. They're sitting there in passive wait, and they're waiting for her to do something. And she'd come up to them and she'd say, "Stand up!" Yeah.
Spelled right?
No,
No?
not spelled right. Boom!
Yeah.
It had it. Stand up! So it was galvanizing their neuromuscular system to just do it.
From motivation.
Motivation. Intimidation. That was part of her fierceness as well.
I was reading about, as well, the polio patients, and I love the image that, especially with the children, that she would work with whatever movement they could offer as the beginning source, and that it would become a playful game in order to help re-educate or
Whatever
give them
they
new
could
possibilities.
do. Yeah. Playing with it. Those of you who know about dance movement therapy know that that is one of the major principles of dance movement therapy. Start where they are. And she was one of the co-founders of the American Dance Therapy Association.
If you want to jump, you have to have the desire to jump, like a child.
Woo! Yeah!
Full body knowledge isn't gained through linear thinking.
Is not gained through linear thinking? Yeah, okay. Full body knowledge is not gained through linear thinking. If you want to jump, jump it. Even on her dying bed, literally, she was curious. She would say things like, "Look at this body, struggling to live. When I'm ready to die, it's still struggling. Just look at it." And she was just noticing what it was going through, and she was noticing how the nurses and the doctors treated people in the hospital. She was curious about why they didn't do it different ways to enable different aspects. So if she were working with somebody in a wheelchair, she saw the nurses that would do things like this. She said, "Why didn't that nurse get them to mobilize through their lower body and then give them the support from underneath?" You know, why didn't they? She was always curious. Why aren't they really curious of how the people could better function? And her own curiosity enabled her to continue moving fully.
I remember the day of my certification graduation. We were partying at this point, and Irmgard came up to me, and she had this bright gleam in her eye, and she touched my face, and she said, "You have new eyes."
You have new
You have
eyes.
new eyes. And it wasn't spell drive, and she just was so loving and gentle. But I can remember to this day that piercing gaze that she had. Yeah.
Could be very direct and very indirect as well. That particular one, very direct. Her spell. JM, would you like to be my partner for a moment? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do this carving gesture here. Carving, good. Okay, and do it a little bit more slowly. Slowly, and I'm going to come and give you just a little bit of resistance. So now begin again. Start again. Right at this point when you would need to engage the lowest point on your scapula. Do you feel you're engaging it?
Yes, I also feel like I have to match you with my strength and
Right. You're
come
also
into you.
coming through with your lower body. Yeah. Now you're going to play with doing from there.
Same gesture?
Go ahead. Now come back down and across. And behind you.
Behind me.
Yeah. So that you have, do it again, not quite so rapidly. So I can come with you. So I'm going back down and across. So I'm giving her a resistance along the entire line of movement there. Yeah. From underneath. This is inviting her to use that grounding into the lowest point of the scapula on both the going up and the going back. One would be to fire the serratus anterior, going forward and out, and back down latissimus and subscapularis probably. Okay?
Were you resisting?
Now she would never say that.
She wouldn't say
She
which
would not
muscles.
say the muscle. She might say the 5-fingered serratus muscle, but I think it has more fingers than 5. But anyway, she might say something like that.
Oh, I can really feel the difference in my arms.
Good. Try it out with each other. She would set up lines of spatial pull so that it back down then, so that you had to move through from your lower body against it. Back down. Da, 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 da. Power forward with spell. Da, 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 da,
Sudden free?
Yeah, sudden free. So it's your arms have been bound, and then they just go free quick. And as you continue, what happens?
Free and light. Free and light. It gets
Free and light. Becomes free and light.
freer and lighter.
Yeah. Then what happens?
Lightness. Some is a little bit of indirect.
Sometimes indirect. But mainly light, quick, free, right? Which drive is that?
I don't know.
Passion.
Oh, I'm having so much fun.
I noticed that theme bow.
Yeah. And what about this? Duh.
Strong, quick, and direct.
Strong, quick, and direct.
And he holds it.
Action. And then the symbol after that, you'll see maintain the strength with directness. Oh,
Stable.
there. So I'm there in stable state. There was never an explanation of why we were doing that, but she just felt like engendering the difference and the vitality in the effort life would be creating the potential for more liveliness in the human organism. And I totally agree with her, as you can tell. When I look back over my notes from her classes in the 1970s, we might do 25 different experiences in one class. So it'd be from action to action to action. Do this, do that, do this, do that. And there was very, very little explanation or teaching at the meta level. We were not being trained at the meta level why we're doing this. Right. So we might do something for a long period of time and just not know why we were doing it. Where we'd be standing in a space like this, and she'd say, okay, grab the forward and down. Woo! Woo! We'd be like, now what? Okay. And she'd say, okay, again. Just really grab it, fall into it. Woo! Woo! And then you feel yourself having to counterbalance here with the left back. So that would be her way of getting you into like a large spatial volute, for instance. So from here to here to here. She would fix it so you absolutely had to totally commit. Exactly. She believed in kinesthetic learning, like sort of spreading out into all these universal ideas that she would have. And she might even have us do something like, and then we would just start to see, what does that mean for us? Try it for yourself. Coming from side low, going through the forward up space to the other side high. What do you get from doing that movement?
I feel like I'm taking myself out into space.
A spreading of the ribs.
Spreading of the ribs. Yeah. So yes, it would actually work with the shape aspect of spreading, obviously. And that sense of opening the vista was something that she was really, really, really good at. I think Rosa mentioned, well, you see, there are many possibilities. That was one of my very favorite gestures that she did, and I started to have this drawn in my book. So I wanted people in the book to have a movement experience of what it was about for her. Start with your middle finger on the dots, carve around, down, and open out. Here's another great picture of Irmgard with her large, expansive statements. She was also, she could be very kind of inside of herself and come into just being the lady that she was. Yes? She was unassuming and really did not promote herself, unfortunately for all of us, as people like Feldenkrais did and various other people that had these body-oriented systems of knowing. And because Irmgard's personality was as it was, our system, I feel, was less known and less valued, therefore. However, she continued to develop and develop, and let's see. Here's another one where she's coming in the sagittal, up this way, choom, scooping. Well. And almost all the movement could be done by any person. So she wouldn't make it like a dance combo, like that one I just did, where it was really taught from just go forward, use your power, go forward, walk forward, let it release, let your arms fly. Woo! Dee! And she would use the verbal support from the effort life. And then that excitement can take you into the air. See what you can do in the air. That sort of thing. She, as a student of Laban in 1925 to 27, did receive a certificate from Laban of being a lay movement leader, leading lay people. And we'll be talking more about movement choirs later on that she did. So just to go back one little tiny bit. So she was born in 1900, and she was born in Berlin, Germany. Her heritage was French Huguenot from the southern part of France, and her maiden name was D'Amboise, Irmgard D'Amboise.
Like Jacques?
Like Jacques D'Amboise, yes, yeah. Actually, it may have been D-O-M. Anyway, so that was 1900, and her birthday was in January. And then in 1925 to 27, she studied with Laban. And she also got a degree or a certificate in the notation work with Laban. She studied choroidics, which is the space harmony aspect, with a woman named Gertrude Lesser, L-O-E-S-S-E-R, Lesser, I don't know how you pronounce it, who was German. And she studied effort with Dusia Bereska, D-U-S-S-I-A-B-E-R-E-S-K-A. And these women actually continued to do Laban's work for many, many, many years.
Wasn't Dusia Bereska one of his lovers? She had?
Yes. So in 1929 to 1933, she had married Mikhail Baryshnikov, who was a Russian Jew. Not Baryshnikov. Bartenieff! Oh my God, I'm sorry. No. Bartenieff, a Russian Jew, and so his heritage was very different from hers, and he had that sort of real feeling, whereas his passion drive and her liking of various effort qualities, but her own temperament towards probably more lightness. So she was studying Fourier notation. Does anybody know what Fourier notation is?
Never heard of it.
Yes, it's like floor patterns, and it was to record like the court dance.
Yeah.
The court dance of the Baroque era. She was really into it, which of course utilized her lovely lightness, her kind of formal side, as opposed to this modern dance stuff that she was doing in the dance theater with her husband. See it? And here's her fierce side.
She's a witch too.
Yep, a witch. In 1933, of course, the Reich was coming into power, even more so than it had been in the past. So there was this escalating political kind of pressure, and it forced the closing of their dance troupe, being as her husband was Jewish. So he and she went to the United States, leaving her two boys, her children, with her sister in Germany, because they wanted to set up a place for everybody to be together before they came and got the children. And I remember asking Irmgard, how could you just go off and leave these two young kids with your sister? And she said, well, she was very much like me. So then eventually she came back, and they got on the last boat out of Germany with the children. In 1936. Then she and this woman, Irma Odette Betts, were teaching notation at the Hanya Home Center in New York City. And Irmgard essentially became the full-time support of the family, because her husband was absolutely crushed that his art was not going forward. And of course, in that time in America, people were not interested in someone who really spoke only German, even if that person had a lot to share. And so he just felt devastated, and Irmgard decided to take her curiosity towards something that could support the family. And so she entered physical therapy school. In 1940 to 1943, they moved to Massachusetts, Pittsfield, and she set up a private practice and also taught classes to young children and movement for non-professionals like she had been trained to do, and dance at summer camp and all that type of thing. So just like a lot of us, she did anything to continue doing, moving, and sharing her knowledge of movement with everybody else, and to support her family. In 1943, they moved back into New York City, and she completed her physical therapy certification at New York University. So she did complete that full certificate, and then she was the chief physical therapist for polio, as you read about, at Willard Park Hospital in New York during the real major polio epidemic that the United States had in the 50s, where people were just devastated by this disease and did not know how to recover from it. And she felt that physical therapy was much too limited to strengthening muscles and wasn't engaging the whole person. Therefore, the people were not motivated to do their exercises, and they just didn't make progress. But Irmgard's clients did make progress because she was using the dynamic effort aspect that she knew of eukinetics, and she was very into having them really move through space with their limbs that could move. And she might even take them and assist their limbs through the space to get the patterns firing. She was into
Can I ask?
proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, PNF, which is a type of therapy that works with kinetic chains along three-dimensional lines of energy. And a PNF pattern would always start from the rotary element, for instance. Say if I'm going to come from here, if the person was lying on their back, then the therapist would start by curling their little fingers in and making their entire arm go down, across, and out, then coming back out along diagonal pathways, because that gets the greatest firing of the supportive muscle tissues coming into play. And so it really makes the whole kinetic chain. We are built to be three-dimensional human beings, and she felt, as you probably read, that everything was much, much, much too dimensional and planar in exercise and in work in physical therapy. So then she developed her whole range of physical therapy around activate and motivate. So she'd get people moving and then motivate them with their own effort life to stay moving. Take a moment and feel for yourself, what would motivate you? What would motivate you? No, anything. To get you going, if you were unable to move very well, what would motivate you? Yes, Nate.
Playing, or if it's a game, maybe that's a big one for me.
Playing and a game feeling?
It's one reason I'm a dancer, I think.
Yeah,
Other
so
exercises is like whatever, like just
Yeah.
go to the gym, but like if we're improvising, that's fun. Like,
that's fun, it's play. Yeah, play is very motivating, that's true.
Competition.
Yeah, so you could.
I don't know, that's motivating for me.
It is? Okay, great. Not motivating for me, but it's great. That's one of Irmgard's talents, was to tune into what would be motivating for that particular person and set up instantaneously the game or exercise or competition or whatever that was, something that would really get them going.
I get really motivated by people that are inspired by what they're doing. When they're inspired, I feel like I want to feel like that. And so, like, when I see somebody who's really passionate about something, I want to be passionate about it too. I want to find that passion.
How do you tap into that place in yourself that will bring that inner passion for you?
I think that I have to try to experience it. I have to try to go there and sort of
Just try it on?
try it on and see if it fits.
Yeah, you'll see that was one of Irmgard's tactics was, just try this, let's play with this together. And as George Bartenieff said, and I reported on in my book, he said that his mother really never tried to fix anybody. They were on this adventure together.
Just
like, how does it apply to who we are as human beings? What do I value? What do I believe? What do I,
Right, yeah.
what I fight for? What, you know, so
Passion.
passion.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So relating to your own inner psyche.
Your inner
and
life,
Your
yeah.
inner life. What's a life for me? And that, I think, is one of the things that we in IMS are really working on all the time. That's part of her lineage. That puts us in her line. Not only just doing some of the same exercises that she might do, but also that belief in the aliveness of the human spirit and tapping into that aliveness. So if you were to think of an aspect in yourself that relates to Irmgard and what you know about her, what aspect would that be? That you might feel like, oh, well, this woman's work could be for me. Yeah,
I
Jeffrey?
feel like this polarity that we've discussed about these like soft, gentle approaches and then this really in your face thing, I feel like I do that when I teach.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Too, but I really relate to this sense of constant adventure, like everything contributing to a way of exploring the world.
Yep, me too, yeah. And I saw you were making this motion.
Yeah, I was just exploring it a little bit.
Uh-huh.
I actually think I relate mostly to the adventure part also, and how every experience can lead to a new experience, and you're just constantly building and learning and exploring.
Right, yeah.
I really relate. That quote that you just used was the quote that I used earlier in the exercise about how we don't need to necessarily be fixing, but it's more about how people are multidimensional.
Oh,
We're all different, and embracing that and going on that journey to sort of make decisions in an educated way about our bodies. And I think there's something really profound about understanding yourself and then making decisions instead of looking at yourself as being this way.
I am this way, this is the way I am, I just can't do anything about it. Okay, great, good point. I think that that offers the sense of growth.
When you were talking about the polio patients, just kind of like wanting, not like waiting, but that she would motivate them to be alive through their whole self and not just be part oriented. But I guess evoking an aliveness in the people that she's working with, and that goes along with how she could make people motivated in their own way. But I really like that idea of aliveness.
Yeah, tracking, yeah.
I can get very in my head. So I like the invitation to just dive in and the optimism that things change through diving in rather than always understanding first mentally. So that, I feel like that's a great place for me because I can be up here.
Yeah, most of education is based on this head, except that a lot of our intelligence comes from the whole of us, and what we make our major decisions in life on comes from the whole of us. So, you know, who do I love? Who can I work with? You know, all these major things. And so it's a revolutionary idea simply to be working with someone's aliveness. So, yeah.
I really relate to the part of Irmgard that was just do it. Try it and see what happens.
Do it.
Just do it.
Right.
Just how change is a process, and that we can come as we are, and that we don't need to try and fix anything necessarily right now in the moment, but that it is an adventure. And
Yeah. So I think one of her perspectives is there's nothing really that needs to be fixed. And the idea of fixing something implies that there's this set goal, whereas somebody that may have what looks like to the outer world and to themselves as a problem, if they were exploring the movement that she might suggest or they could find in their everyday life, they actually might find a way to go beyond what their possibility would have been had they been fixed.
Which must have been very frustrating for her working in physiotherapy. Because it seems like all physiotherapy does is fix a problem.
Right.
And the problem is so localized in the way that
Yeah,
it's
it's
approached.
like the knee, the knee.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
But it also probably had the quality of continuing her reinvestment in that perspective, because if you have a pull to organize around or against, it continues to
Sure,
fuel
sure,
that
yeah,
versus
right,
something that's amorphous that you don't have.
Right.
That's an interesting point, absolutely. So
Peggy, could you say, given what you were just saying about not fixing things, she named one of her first books here in the States, Correctives.
Yes. Okay, great. Because she was coming out of a physical therapy background. That's a great point. And there was a little kind of book about, like a pamphlet about this big, that had notes from those of us that were in the classes that were transcribed with some little stick figure diagrams, and it was called Correctives. Because when she worked with private clients, mostly she got her private clients from people who were having some sort of bodily upset. So many people from lots of different walks of life would come to her, and she started to see which things they really needed, and that's how she developed this series of what eventually came to be called the Basic Six, because she felt that upper-lower was a big problem. If she were to look at problems in people in the United States, it's people that were not connecting from their lower body through into their upper body. Then, what she realized later, after she had been working with all of us in the training groups, she realized, oh, wait a minute, this is not really just corrective. It's really the baseline of fundamental action in the human being. It's a fundamental aspect. It's a fundamental approach. And of course, she had received in her physical therapy training all the different awarenesses of stage-specific human development, and how the reflexes lead next into the equilibrium responses, et cetera, et cetera. And so she had that as a baseline, but she wasn't really, in her physical therapy work, working with regular people that had problems. She was following for a while that sense of, oh, well, I just have to correct their problem. Although she was using this incredible broad palette of tools, and which the other physical therapists were not using. Then she had this realization when we were in the training classes that it was lower down than that. It was more fundamental than just correcting something in the knee or anything like that. So then that little pamphlet started to become what she eventually wanted to have as her book, which then was called Body Movement Coping with the Environment. And it was never called that to begin with. She started putting things like in folders and ideas, and then she wanted several of us who were studying with her at that time to meet with her every week for like 3 or 4 hours. So we did it on Saturday mornings in this loft that one of our colleagues named Kedzie Penfield, who is still in this work, and she lives in Scotland. I was just over there teaching last year for her. We would work with her and try to help her coalesce all these vast multitudes of ideas into a way that could be coherent for people in the American public. It was a long process, and I can't say that I was there till the very end of it, because we all realized, the people like me, that it was going to be a years and years and years process, and we had to go ahead and live our lives. I wanted to become a performing dancer. Different people wanted to do different aspects, physical therapy, etc. And so eventually she hired a woman named Dory Lewis to help her write the text. And then she would send chapters off to us out in the field. Like I remember getting a whole huge manuscript when I was on tour in Arizona. And she wanted to know what I thought about it. And so I had these really, really long sessions on that phone, talking to her like, this isn't clear here. And that picture that you have, I wouldn't call that. And, you know, back and forth and back and forth. So it was a very interesting idea, but Dory was not a Laban movement analyst. So she should have worked with somebody that was trained in the material, from my perspective. And the original title on the book was not Coping with the Environment, but it was called Body Movement, A Key to Perception, I believe it was. I had that. She kept trying to make lists of things that she thought were important. So she would always say, teach from the principles, not just teaching exercises. Teach from the principles. So like a principle to her was connectedness. Just that the whole body is connected. I framed some of those principles into the words that I used in my text. And she really was very, very big on dynamic alignment as opposed to static alignment, which at that point was like piled building blocks on top of each other. Which, of course, the minute you're thinking of aligning yourself as piling building blocks on top of each other, what happens the moment you go off vertical? The blocks just totally collapse. So the idea that there is a dynamism and that even the tiniest shift of weight shifts the whole structure was something that most people were not attuned to. And she did not talk about the figure eight, just to let you know. I was working with Joan Skinner and Alexander technique, and this idea of these volumes here and volumes here that had different flow lines. It started to seem to me that they fit together in a figure eight pattern, and I found it so helpful, and I think lots of people have found that to be helpful. But Irmgard did talk about dynamic alignment. Then I was very concerned to come up with something that was easy to describe to people.
Is she one of the first people who started sort of talking about it that way? Is that like,
Dynamic alignment?
Yeah.
I don't know fully, but in my experience she was. Because most teachers at that time were like, tuck your pelvis under, bring your chin in, now move, etc. And that was not her approach, obviously. She was not into that. So, I mean, I see him holding here a set position, moving everything else against that position, as opposed to having the sense, yes, I'm investing in this form, but it's still an alive form. So I feel like a lot could still be learned from her by a lot of different training techniques. So this aspect of weight shift, that was one of her really big ones. Where does the weight shift begin? And she felt that most people in our society were shifting from their upper body, sort of tilting and falling over, like. So another big one of her concerns that she wanted really dealt with was global proximal joints. Does everybody know what that is? Okay, so the shoulder joint and the femoral joint have these rounded forms. And so that enables them to really have a full three-dimensional range of movement. And she felt that we have not fully evolved as human beings until we are able to use that full range of movement. Our scapula is essentially like a triangle, and each part of it is relatively equal. Whereas in other animals, they might have a triangle where one part is way more than another. But ours, the dimensionality and the possibility for full range movement in these global proximal joints is huge, and most of us are not training to use it. So she really wanted that accessed as she worked with people.
What is it called? A global?
Global, like a globe.
Oh, the global spherical, okay.
Yeah, like a globe, like the world. You know,
Like
your
its
whole
shape,
world
referring
exists
to its
right here in your femoral joint and in your scapula humeral rhythm with
And
the
it's really
humerus.
those two that you're talking about.
Pardon?
There aren't more than that, right?
No.
Sure. I mean, that's not
No, right.
Thank you.
Right, yeah. Well, each joint has its own thing, you know.
Yeah.
Those are the
ones.
big ones that...
Those are the proximal.
The proximal, the ones that are into the proximal. This is the proximal joint of the head. And with the distal steering, and because of the radius and the ulna going around each other, it does have a full range, hopefully, for most people. This flipping that we were playing with Janice this way and this way, that isn't using our full humanity. Because a lot of animals can do pincer-like things.
Irmgard had incredible hands.
Oh, she did, that's right.
She had amazing, her hands were large. I remember the first time she worked on me, I was astounded at how large her hands were.
Yes, because she was relatively slight as a human, but her hands were very large, you're right.
And they were so expressive.
You can see in all of these pictures.
You can see in these pictures.
You can see that her hand, here she is going, kind of like that.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
So the other thing that was not being done in physical training for most people was the emphasis on the initiation and the preparation for the initiation of movement. So most people were focusing on the action, you know, oh, the leg is swinging. I want to see it up here, so I'm just going to put it there. You know, however I get it there, that's okay. But that is not what Irmgard's focus was. Her focus was on the preparation, the inner preparation to organize the whole from that kinesthetic identification with where in space the bony landmarks were going. So if they were going forward, going down, under, forward, and up, that would organize the whole body if you could really find the stability for that mobility. That would be enough in her mind. So in teaching, you would never correct in the middle of a phrase. Go back to the beginning. So that's that part that's in my book about the preparation and the initiation determine the entire course of the phrase. Unfortunately, dancers were not doing that though. And even most sports people are not doing it. They're like going for the end point, going for the win, like the top moment when you catch the ball, as opposed to how do you prepare your whole body to get it. That then led, of course, into the sequencing, the overall sequencing of the movements. How did the movement flow or phrase itself through the body? That's where then the kinetic chains became very important, and that was a huge part of proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, was this idea of kinetic chains. It has become popular recently again in physical therapy, and they call it chain up. Isn't that funny? Chain up. So, for instance, if you wanted to work on your proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation so that you're working with a kinetic chain, they would set up a series of things for you to do, maybe standing on something like a block and reaching down, 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 up, etc. If you were patterning this joint. And then you would do it with your arms out to the side is easiest, of course, because you have that counterbalance spatially. Then you maybe only one arm to balance the other side leg. Then with your eyes closed, because a lot of us, including myself, hold ourselves up from our eyes. Yeah. And so this type of thing is coming back in physical therapy, but it was really, really out for many years, as was developmental movement.
Irene Dowd has kind of maintained it throughout a lot of her work, though, right?
She wasn't as aware of it until she came and studied at the Institute.
Is that right?
Yeah. Her work with Lulu Schweigert was always imagistically oriented. And but it wasn't necessary, and those images were based on anatomy, which I think is really valuable. However, they were not quite the same idea of principles that Irmgard was working with. Spatial tension, something that we have been working with, like remember when we were working today, going forward, coming through our legs, and then running our legs back and forward and back. Irmgard felt that space had the power to really support you, as did Laban, and that if you used a space as a partner, everything would be much, much more easy for you. And she saw things in constellations of crystalline forms that would change. So if you moved one little tiny bit, the whole thing would change as a crystalline form. It would, in the space harmony work, we call it chording, like a chord in music. Da da dum, you know that? Dum, with three things at once. So that would be what would be going on in a ballet. Like this would be a chord. Yeah, and then if you moved one of them, then the chord would change. Okay, take a moment and see if there are things that you have questions about Irmgard, and maybe between Janice and me we can come up with something.
What you talk about taking classes with her? I'm just wondering what was the setting of that like? Did you think you were going to a dance class, or were you like, oh, we want to learn to do physical therapy, or?
Oh, good question. Yeah. Well, this was the studio right here, and it was at number 12. Fifth Avenue was like right on the corner of Fifth Avenue in New York and 12th Street. It was a small, very small studio, and I was the janitor because I had no money, and so I traded janitorial services for classes. And I had heard of this Laban notation, which I went into, as I told you, in 1963, but I didn't actually move to New York until 67. And so I was going to complete my notator certification, but because I also had a degree in psychology, the people at the bureau said, oh, well, if you're into psychology, you have to study. You have to study with Irmgard. So I said, okay, fine. Always open to new possibilities myself. I'm in that lineage with her. So I thought I was coming in to understand more about human movement. That's what I thought. And at first, of course, I had on my young dancer judgmental aspect, like, oh my gosh, this woman thinks she's going to teach me to dance. No, she wasn't trying to teach me to dance, as it turns out, of course. But I had a judgmental aspect. Oh, her pelvis looks a little tucked under, or her whatever. And I think we all, as different ages, appreciate different things and see different things. And she was not, I would say, a clear teacher, for instance. And because I had a degree in education as well as psychology, I thought, man, she should have prepared for this. We're doing this movement we didn't do any preparation for. But that wasn't her way. It was just like jump in and do it. So I had to just get over all that and enjoy being in this group of people. And there were a lot of different kinds of people, lots of different body types, as opposed to being in dance where very similar body types, as you can see out there, are valued. And it was a growth experience for me. But because I was also interested in psychology, my scientist side wanted to find out more of this thing that she kept talking about how inner expression came into the outer world. So what were the elements of this? What are these elements of expression? Because in the notation, it was wonderfully clear in terms of which body part was doing what, where it was going, and how long it took it to go there, like 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. We could record that really, really easily, but as you probably know, the space is only one part of expression. So I was interested in human expression. Also cross-cultural work, because I had just come back from the Peace Corps in Ethiopia. And Irmgard was very much into cross-cultural work. She worked with Alan Lomax in the choreometrics project, which was looking at folk song style and movement style. That was like a beginning, very, very beginning anthropological kind of, or ethnological kind of research. And they looked at hundreds of films, at least 400. But of course, they could not have films of every single culture in the whole world. They mainly looked at non-industrialized cultures to see what Alan Lomax was interested in was, do these cultures group into kind of clusters of elements that then define them as cultures that belong together. So his work was seminal in that area, but later on, of course, people said, oh, well, there's not enough sample size, there's all these various problems with the research, but it was a huge, kind of interesting project. Anyway, it's a fascinating project, and of course, having people that are insiders in the culture, that was not used. And most anthropology today works to have people living within the culture, not just coming in and taking photos and recording the songs, etc. But, you know, research goes at different paces in different ways.
What was that person's name?
Irmgard and Alan Lomax, L-O.
Were the other people who were taking Irmgard's classes there for similar reasons to you?
Well, there were several anthropologists. You saw the Paul Byers film the other day. He was in the very first class I ever took with Irmgard. Yes. The Native American Indians. And he was fascinated just with like what he then did a whole film on, which was palm play. Alan Lomax did one. But there are whole cultural aspects about whether the palm is visible or not. Like some cultures have long, long, long sleeves that cover the palm, because the palm is definitely felt to relate right into the heart, and people who would expose their palm to other people would be opening their heart. So if your palms are out, that would be a really different statement than if you did like this. So Irmgard would have us do things traveling across the floor where we might do something like we'd start with our arms here forward and then just go. Or coming forward from here and go. How did that palm rotation change your inner feeling? So playing with that would be something that she might do for 15 or 20 minutes, literally, to just let us feel what it was like experientially.
I think those Alan Lomax's videos are in the library here. The last time I looked, they were in the library here.
The great thing about those videos, it's called Folk Song Style and Culture is the name of the videotapes. And there's that one, and there's Step Style and Palm Play. It's a 3-series. And the thing I don't like about the videos is that they are really simplistic. But the footage that they have of movement from different cultures is really beautiful. Yeah.
Well, I think I heard you say that Irmgard was certified to teach LMA to lay people. But was there
not LMA? It was she was a lay leader in movement choir kind of things.
Oh, a lay leader for movement choirs.
Then people like Vigman and coming down in that line were the more professional dancer heritage from Laban.
And he had a certificate for real dance teachers, for the more professional.
He did have a certificate, I didn't realize that.
And then those people spread all over Germany, and there are still some Laban schools that are left, even in Germany, and one woman, Vera Maletic, who taught at Ohio State University for many years, her mother was a Laban teacher in Slovakia. And she had a whole school that trained dancers, which I met some of them at the Laban conference that was in Bratislava a few years ago. So it still has these little pockets of things. Yeah.
So I have a comment when you were talking about her wanting to see three-dimensional. I suddenly thought, what would she think about the yoga craze? But that's more of
About the yoga?
the yoga craze going
The
on.
craze.
Because it's a lot of upper, lower, and very planar, but that's not the
I think she
question.
would say that just doing that movement without focusing on the principle behind the movement is not so useful.
But the question that I have is, I know that the IMS program has really gone deep into kind of really drawing from other systems and looking at BMC, but I'm curious about who else has really filled out the body connectivity piece of the Laban work. So we're learning about Irmgard. I'm just wondering about others that you know about, and maybe that could not segue, but also pick up a thread of a conversation we were having on Monday that we didn't have a lot of time for, about the different schools of thought around this work. So.
Okay, Bonnie Bainbridge-Cohen did the Laban Movement Analysis Certification Program in 1970-71. She was in the first intensive format group that met January, July, January. So
That you guys did through IMS?
No. This was at the Dance Notation Bureau. There are still people doing the work that were in that very first intensive group. There had been other groups that were non-intensive that met on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday that would go through the whole year. But these intensive groups, like you, would just come like in chunks. And Bonnie was in that type of a group. She was already an occupational therapist, so she and Irmgard both had this developmental underlie background. And then Bonnie started doing her own work and calling it body-mind centering. She did her Laban certification project on vowel sounds, sounding and vibration, like in relation to space, like ooh, ee, et cetera, et cetera. Like this would be a horizontal, this would be a vertical, et cetera. So that was interesting, and that then Irmgard and everybody started doing a lot of sounding, but of course that is done in many, many meditation techniques as well, which were also becoming more well-known in New York City. The integral yoga was right across the street from where I lived, and Swami Satchitananda had a great big following, and so there was all sorts of things that were feeding in, and Irmgard would go through like these various kind of like a kick on like rotation or sounding or something like that. But in terms of what has lasted, I think Bonnie's work, and since Janice is a certified BMC person, I'm going to ask her to speak to that, is one of the biggest.
I think Bonnie has done a brilliant job of blending sort of her fascination with the specificity inside the human body. I mean, you can spend a long time diving into taking your intention into different systems and into different tissues and into the cell and into the mitochondria, so you can really dive really, really deeply. And yet she also, so you're diving way down here into the sensate, but she's very, very educated in the specificity of anatomy and all the sciences of the body. So there's like big deep dives and then lots of what you might call higher mental stuff around the human body. But I feel like she took what she learned from the Laban system, and where I felt it really surfaced is when she starts talking about the qualitative aspects of, say, blood. She'll say that the blood has a certain kind of qualitative aspect.
Join her with this.
But it's, in the Laban system, we would call this a phrase of movement. You know, it's got a little.
So it has an increasing pressure.
Arterial blood.
Arterial flow, yeah.
Yeah, and so, but it was a cluster of information. It was a phrase of what I would call effort. And so if we were all BMC people and we were watching a person move, people would say, oh, I see blood. A circle, you know, where you'd learned that. And so I felt like it's very sensate and rich in that way, except I felt like she took the Laban work and looked inside the body, what she did.
And in her own experience.
Yes, yeah.
And which is great, that she used her own experience to describe what the movement was and what the dynamic was. If this is arterial blood.
And there's flow, venous flow.
And then the venous flow would come back in this way with lightness, coming back into the heart rather than being pumped out from the heart. And then lymph kind of correlates with directness. And I felt her, I still feel, that she has incredible knowledge and is, as Janice said, wonderfully sensate, great for proprioceptive, going inward and locating sensations and spending a lot of time in a low brain level and then calling it from an upper brain level. And I think in terms of engendering experience, that's fabulous. In terms of observation, personally, I feel like you're not really observing blood or liver or whatever it is that she might be talking about. You are seeing the movement.
Perhaps a different way to ask this question that kind of bridges the first to the second question is IMS the place, I know both of you and I know kind of Brenton, I haven't met other faculty, but that are still really curious about deepening this piece of body connectivity in the BEST system. I mean, are other of the training programs still, I mean, because you all have done a lot of other kinds of training and are bringing it to and making those connections and bridges, but perhaps it kind of bridges my two questions about who's deepening the body part of the BEST system and the other schools of thought around.
Right. Well, I think there are some people in New York, like John Chanik, who did our Seattle program, but our faculty. He now teaches on the New York faculty, but he is very interested in deepening body function by wrapping therabands so that you have to work against a little bit of resistance to train your muscles in connective patterns that would be strong enough to serve you. So he's very interested in that. People like Leslie.
Leslie.
The woman who runs Movement of Foot in New York is very into Pilates and how it relates to the Laban Bartenieff work. Martha Eddy, dealing with the expressivity and training people to work with cancer patients to bring their sense of expression through their own body to them. So people are deepening the body level work, not all in the same way.
Yeah, I think it's application oriented. People take the work and they take it into the area of their interest. And then they dovetail that information with the Laban work and it becomes sort of a unique thing.
Why do you think that there's so many, my experience as a modern dancer is that many teachers are using elements of the Bartenieff exercises but not explaining it, and even actually a teacher who has the certificate from Columbia that the Laban certificate was using Bartenieff work but not explaining it or making that. Why do you think that is happening?
I think
where are they getting these exercises?
Well, I think it's out there.
It is out there.
It's out there, and people have a nibble at it, or they get exposed to it a little bit, and they latch onto it, and they don't know the context necessarily. They don't know the history behind it, and pretty soon that kind of drifts away if you don't have the bigger picture.
Yeah, then you're doing leg swings.
Become a style, actually. In
It's really common in warm-ups.
Well, and you call it like Dada. You see people teaching Dada, and all it is BF taken to a little bit more complex thing, and it's a whole thing on its own now. And you don't see them crediting
nothing.
BF.
Please credit the work. Regina Miranda from the Laban Institute of Movement Studies, she's the artistic director of the Laban Institute of Movement Studies. She and I were planning on doing a conference in San Francisco, but we didn't get any funding for it. And she wanted to call it Contagion, just what you're talking about. It's kind of like you don't know where you got the flu virus. Because it's out there. You don't know what you touched, who gave you that. But these people are all over the world using Bartenieff fundamentals, Laban movement analysis concepts, calling it, blood or this or that or the other. And
the
sensitivity to how you experience that, they've gotten in some kind of other class that perhaps that teacher didn't know where she got it or he got it. Yeah.
And my experience with some of the dance teachers in the college university back east is they use like one part of the system with another complete part of a different system and then teach it as this whole, and I'm just like, no. I get protective of the work, and
I feel like that's some of the complexity, though, because I think that's also the beauty of how it develops. Like, I've definitely had teachers who've taken it, some who've credited it and some not. My teacher, B.J. Sullivan, uses it, credits it, and has her own technique, which she's actually chosen then not to trademark because she doesn't want to get into that whole thing. But I know she has this real debate, but she definitely changes it. You're not taking a Bartenieff class, but you can feel those same connectivities in your body and this other.
And I think it's important to just at least list it in your bio. I have studied Laban movement analysis and Bartenieff fundamentals.
So like
there's like no experience.
No, which are not trademarked, by the way.
Inherited,
and they don't know where it's coming from at all.
Yeah.
I have the things that I really want to know most are personal stories and anecdotes in your memory.
Okay, I'm going to run you through my list. I have about 4 minutes left.
But I want to know the lineage that I'm a part of and what some of the underlying assumptions are, so I can work with them and think about bridging and honor it. And so that's just maybe it's because I go into the intellectual realm, but
Well, I think that the major ones that you asked about on that day were Jungian psychology.
It was about how, I mean, I know that it was kind of the correspondence of how a theory gets developed between movement and some sort of symbol translate and word put with it, which there's a correspondence, and that's how theory starts to be generated. And I still don't know if I understand fully.
Well, I think that part of it is through observation, of somebody using a certain movement quality over and over again, that say Warren Lamb might watch them use this movement quality and notice that that manager, who has a lot of what we call directness, is very efficient at investigating, doing research on the details of things. And
pattern recognition.
So it's pattern recognition of what he sees. Oh, that came up with that person, and this came up with that same thing came up with this person. It's a correlation, And then Dr. Judith Kestenberg did 20 years longitudinal studies of these people from birth up into their 20s and saw their movement patterns develop and made correlations to the parenting and various other things in that way. So on her deathbed, as I told you before, she was saying, look at this body struggling to live. This is the exact quote. Isn't it amazing, the inner impulse to live? Here I am, ready to die, and look at this body struggling to live. And she was very interested in the space harmony work up until the very end of her life. One of her very good friends is a mathematician, Haresh Lavani, and he was always talking with her about 16-dimensional space and these models that had thousands of different things going on. And he was in the hospital when I was there while she was dying, and we were talking out in the corridor. And he was going to go in and have a theoretical discussion with her about this. So right into the end, she was following her curiosities. She loved McDonald's French fries.
That's one way.
Me too. We connect.
She felt they were very crispy and loved it. So then also she did not hesitate to dress not her age. Even at the age of 80 or 81, she might wear a big yellow bow in her hair and walk along with like plaid pedal pushers and things. Or she wore these slippers, these house slippers that were just kind of crazy. Like she looked like a doddering old woman. And the next minute she'd look like she was 15 years old. It was really interesting, but she just kept, whatever interested her. And she had this yellow bumblebee colored boombox that she would carry. And one time I was walking with her at Ohio State University, and this woman who was obviously Irmgard's compatriot age-wise was dressed in this very tailored, straight pencil skirt with, uptight. She was walking along carrying her little briefcase, and there was Irmgard with her plaid pants on, swinging her boombox and her big yellow bow. It was like such a contrast, because I would teach for the January session at the University of Hawaii, and Irmgard wanted to get out of the cold New York City winter, so she would come and have her own apartment, and then she would come and watch the classes and make a few comments and things like that. And then she and I would do things like go to the beach and practice the A scale and the B scale and things like that out there with the waves. We're like doing, and then she was always correcting me about the palm facings and the rotary change and how would it be if we did it this way rather than this way and that sort of thing. We also studied Qigong, which she thought was really wonderful in terms of the weight shift and the subtle aspect of like where you pour the weight into one side so the other side can float, that sort of thing. She was very much into that, and she loved having her palm read and things. And always, whenever people read her palm, they would always say, "You are a very creative woman." Then there was the year of the tensor fasciolata.
The year of?
Yes, she was really on the case of how people's bad use of their femoral joint came from holding in the tensor fasciolata and trying to support themselves from the IT band here and the tensor fasciolata and gripping their gluteuses and things like that.
I have to know if that was 1977, the year I was born.
Could have been. I'm not kidding. I don't know. Then there was, she was very compassionate, and for instance, I injured my knee one time dancing when I was thrown from a lift, and she wrote me this wonderful letter, just telling me about her own recovery processes and sending me good wishes and things, so she was very personable as well. She, I told you about the phone conversations about her book. Then there was the year of the etc. So we'd tone for at least 15 or 20 minutes in class, getting our inner channel open. She really had a concern for linking the work with other cultures, and she liked to work with people from different cultures, like this woman Yin-Lu Wang, who was Chinese, was in California, and Irmgard went numerous times to work with Yin-Lu and wanted it to be, her work to be taken to China, and Yin-Lu did do that, and she has a library that honors Irmgard in China now. Then what we now call the basic 6 used to be the basic 5, because Irmgard was really not very big on body half. That was not her favorite thing. Her favorite thing was these diagonal connections through the body moving into cross-laterality. So she skipped body half, but then we ended up putting it back into the basic 6 because one of the physical therapists that came to the Saturday morning work sessions said, "Irmgard, you gotta have this. This is a really big part of development." So she put it in. But she really wasn't interested in the idea that there were these exercises. She was just teaching movement and teaching people to function. Then when you would go to her house for a dinner party, I'd arrive and she'd be there in her beautiful little dresses, and she would be so excited, just like a teenager on her first date. It was like, "Oh, you're coming, oh." And she had this thing on her mantle that was a postcard that said, "Constant change is here to stay." And she kept that up there for years and years and years. And then she also had these books. The books were just piled everywhere. Helter-skelter everywhere. And now her files are like that at the Laban Institute. People, after she died, they just put them in boxes and put them away.
But now they're at the library, the New York City Library, aren't they?
I don't know about that. You think they are? Good. I hope so, because they need somebody to take care of them.
They moved. I believe they.
Oh, good. I hope
New
so.
York City Library.
Yep. But she would have books on like things like you wouldn't expect, so like smoothing your wrinkles with light touch. All sorts of things.
We'll try
like
that one tomorrow.
It's a spell drive. I'm telling you, I used it when I was working in the Napa Valley Spa. Okay. She had 2 sons. One of them was like a very straight kind of culture guy, you know. I think he was an accountant or something like that. The other one was an actor, and he and his wife, this was George Bartenieff, founded Theater for the New City. And he has been in that field his whole life. And in 1997, I got a letter from George saying that he had finally gotten interested in his mother's work. I'm like, oh my God. Anyway.
And hopefully he was teaching something other than the cube. Right?
Yes, he was. He was working with actors in the theater other than in the cube, yes. So interesting how somebody who is always with something doesn't necessarily value it, of course.
So what happened to her husband?
Mikhail never really was able to assimilate in the United States. And when the Second World War was over, he eventually went back to Germany because he felt more comfortable there. He did not feel like, as an actor, where the major thing he perceived to be about the voice and being able to speak, he would always have to play very limited roles in the United States. So he wanted to be where he could develop his art form. No.
She never remarried.
She never remarried, no.
So
although she did every once in a while go out on some dates or something, but she never really remarried. And she had 2 grandsons, and she would babysit for them quite often in her apartment in New York. And she died of a system-wide infection that started in her toe, and it was kind of like a staph infection or something that's kept creeping through her bloodstream. And so George Bartenieff heard about this kind of chelation therapy, which is where they would run her blood through a machine, and it would take out all the impurities and things, and then it would be like the blood was washed and could go back in her body. But by that time she was really, really weak. And so she never really recovered from that. And I was in her apartment, and she was literally eating 1 boiled egg, and it took her an hour to eat this 1 boiled egg, which was so different from when she was in her most lively, flying and falling kind of state. So the thing I also then want to leave you with is that each year it was a new thing that she would get interested in and continue to explore. So keep exploring, and then you're in the line of Irmgard, the lineage.
To see the world, there's such a lot of world.